The question you should ask yourself is, why shouldn't I be doing this?
So deep, Alex. This next episode is one that came about actually because Street Child came to us, and as you probably know, Jody and I met on the Sierra Leone Marathon. The first time we ever met was on the plane, getting on the plane to go to Sierra Leone, and they've messaged us to say that actually it's back on this year. They're going out, and they were wondering if we could do some kind of advert for Street Child or something like that to talk about how good the race is, why you should go and do it. And I thought that would be really boring for the listener. And actually, what would be much better for us to do is actually to the 10-year anniversary and to actually look at the impact that a race and an organisation like Street Child Sierra Leone Marathon has over 10 years on the people, the culture, the country, and the people that run it themselves and raise money for it. So when I signed up for Sierra Leone, I was given a mentor to be my mentor on the second year, from the first year, saying this is how it happens. And I was lucky enough to get Josh, who has done every single one. And we've just been discussing now. I always thought he was a trustee because he is, in many people's views, like he's the Don, he's the daddy of the Sierra Leone Marathon. He's always pushing the fundraising of everyone. He's always dragging people in, and he just knows everything about it. So I thought I'd bring Josh to come back on to talk about the impact that he's seen and he's felt and he's been part of and responsible for. So welcome to the podcast, the wonderful Josh Ord-Hume.
Shall I share myself as well? It's very nice to be here, David. It's nice to see you on the screen. It seems like a long time since I actually saw you in the flesh. Actually, I saw you briefly at the end of last year, didn't I? I saw you briefly.
Yeah, Leroy and I dropped down for a Sierra Leone Street Child drinks. Yeah, indeed. Well, shall we rewind? Because I'm sure actually a lot of people would have seen you and met you and heard you just through the running community, because you've been fairly involved in it through the years. But shall we rewind to how did you actually get involved in that first year?
Well, that's. I mean, you would think that after all these years, I'd have a very well rehearsed answer to a very straightforward question. How did I get involved? At the time, it would have been 11 years ago now, because we're coming up to not the 10th Street Child Marathon, but we're coming up to the 10th anniversary of the first event, because obviously we've had a 3-year COVID enforced hiatus, and at the time I was chairman of a very small, I couldn't even call it a running club, I'd call it a running collective, a very sort of ramshackle, disparate bunch of people who used to run in southwest London together. And I had my contact details on the club website. And as you probably know yourself, because I think you've been chairman of various running groups, if you're out there, if your contact details are anywhere in the public domain, every single day you get telephone calls from charities saying, come and do this marathon, come and run along the Great Wall of China, come and run in the desert, come and run on the Arctic Circle, come and do this and raise money and bring lots of people. And I got quite sort of used to politely fielding these calls and saying thanks, but no thanks. Anyway, one day, this woman called Jana Britt Green telephoned me. I don't know if you remember Jana.
Yeah.
Now, Jana was on the board of trustees back then, and back in those days, Street Child was literally Tom, the founder, Jana, Chloe, a telephone, and a very dingy office near Liverpool Street Station. So Jana had been given this task of going through every single running club in the UK and contacting the chairman and getting them trying to persuade them to get out, to take the group out. Anyway, so I got this phone call from Jana saying, come and run a Street Child, come run this inaugural marathon in Sierra Leone. And I was at work, I was doing something else, so I was just trying to hang up. I was saying, okay, well, I'll just email me and I'll get back to you. Bye. And I was just trying to get Jana off the phone, but Jana speaks so damn quickly. She sounds in this incredibly high-pitched voice with a lot of urgency, and she sounds like a woodland creature being trodden on. Very difficult to actually get her off the phone. So I just let her talk, and I readily admit that I didn't really know. I mean, despite having lived and worked in Senegal about 20 years ago, I didn't really know where Sierra Leone was. So while
Mm.
she was talking, I kind of gave in and I started Googling Sierra Leone while she was on the phone. And one of the first photos that came up on Google Images was that iconic photo of the beach in Sierra Leone where
Mm.
the Bounty adverts were filmed back in the 80s. This
Cocker Beach?
incredible, the Tokay Beach.
Cocker Beach, yeah, yeah.
Tokay Beach was where the Bounty, A Taste of Paradise. Those iconic, awful adverts from the 70s or 80s were filmed there. And I looked out of my office window, and would have been a sort of a wet Wednesday afternoon in November. Looked back at my screen at this fantastic beach. Looked out of the window again at the drizzle, and thought, And at the same time, I think I was about to turn 40, and basically I was waiting for death. And I signed up. So I completely failed to do what Jana had asked me to do, which was recruit lots of people from my running club. But I very successfully recruited myself, and not just once, but every year since. So that was how I started.
And actually, so that first year, it was the draw of really the holiday more than anything else. I think that sold you on the.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, and I think that's what. I think that's how it's changed. My relationship with the race has changed over 10 years, because obviously back in those days I was very focused on running. I was very focused on event running, on doing events. And I still am, 145 marathons later. But in the intervening years, I think there's a small group of us who have been quite loyal, and we're much more focused on the fundraising now than we are on the event itself and the actual running. And we're much more focused on raising money and actually feeding the charity, actually helping the charity. So the running bit is actually a very small component in a much bigger experience. And this is what people, when people come out with us, this is what they realize. They're very focused on what's it going to be like running in the jungle, running in that heat. How do I train for it? How do I hydrate? How do I eat? And then they realize that actually, Nick Kershaw puts it very well at his impact events. He says that the run is actually just your lap of honor at the end of a week of engaging with the charity, or in his case, the NGOs with which Impact partner. So I mean that week, the marathon is at the end of that week, but in fact it's at the end of some very high impact visits to projects where people get to see exactly what is being done with their money. And that's the bit that over the years I have become a lot more engaged with.
And in that first year, because if people haven't listened to the really early episode with Jody, maybe episode 3 with Jody and I talked about Street Child in Sierra Leone, in the first year, did you have the same kind of visit where was the charity established in the country? Did they already have the projects that the money was going to directly toward, or was it a case of we're here, we're going to figure out what people need help with?
You mean what was Street Child's state of development back then?
Yeah.
Well, Tom founded Street Child in 2008, and McKenney, where the race is run, was always the sort of the spiritual home of Street Child. But it is definitely the case that as a local force for good, Street Child has proved its worth on numerous occasions in the past 14 years, since 2008. I mean, if you consider the history of Sierra Leone, our marathon came hot on the heels of the end of a decade-long civil war that had just been incredibly awful. I mean, the film that everybody used to associate with Sierra Leone was Blood Diamond, which really depicts the most awful atrocities.
Right.
So that was 2012, and then hot on the heels of a decade of civil war came the Ebola crisis, and Street Child was incredibly active on the ground in getting out sanitation kids awareness raising about hand hygiene and all that kind of stuff. All of the stuff that we now take for granted because we've had 2 years of COVID. Street Child was very, very, very good for that awful 18-month period during which Ebola, caused absolute havoc and heartache and hardship, not just in Sierra Leone but Liberia and Guinea. Street Child was incredibly present, almost spearheading the Ebola effort. Then,
and just kind of taking it back to that first year. Then, was the money? Do you think the vision was already there for we'll bring this many runners, they'll raise X amount of money, and this will be allocated towards specifically these X areas? Or
was it that clear in Tom's mind back then?
Yeah. Do you think there was already the association in how it was being pitched to people, and also in Tom's view as well of what the need was?
I think so. I mean, I spoke to Tom. I had a long conversation with him last summer about it. I think he had right from the outset. He had a vision. He knew exactly what needed to be done, and the way he describes it is, it's a question of getting a funnel in place, and then once the funnel is in place, you just have to chuck stuff down it, and that stuff is money, is funding. So back in 2012, we raised, I think, about £250,000, or thereabouts. It might not be that might not be that accurate, but we've had about 100 runners every year. Each runner raises between £2,000 and £2,500. So let's say £250,000. Back then, Street Child absolutely needed the marathon to survive. The marathon was income for the charity, and it was pretty much the only income. It was the flagship event. In the intervening period, Tom and all the people he surrounds himself with have become very adept at getting grants from DFID or the Foreign Office and various other organisations around the world. So that Street Child is no longer utterly dependent on the marathon to survive financially. But I think your question was, did he have that vision? Yes, I think he did. I think he knew. I mean, he always knew that ultimately he didn't want the charity to be utterly dependent, utterly tied to one event, and that's the state of affairs that we're at now.
Yeah, and actually, you're right. I guess the big issues for Street Child and the event itself, but through the years, as you said, has been the Ebola crisis, and then also. Yeah.
And then after Ebola, I think it was 2017, the summer of 2017, there were deadly mudslides in Freetown. I don't know if you remember what Freetown looks like, but it's a strip along the coast of built up area, and there's a huge mountainside directly behind it. So, and people have built on top of this mountain, and the June rains came, and basically an entire mountain collapsed onto Freetown, and people were drowned, people were crushed, and again, Street Child were there, delivering aid exactly where it was needed, almost immediately. So that's Street Child has built up initially any country is going to be rather wary of an NGO that just comes in and declares that it's going to help out and do good. But I think Street Child has more than proved itself over the past 12 years.
And in terms of what was the perception of runners and of a race by? Because I know just before we started recording, we were talking about Mark, who him and his mum both ran when I was there. He then organised it the year after, and he was saying how he was going out there to talk to the local police. He was going to be talking to politicians and really involving all the power structures in the event to ensure it's smooth running. Did you get a sense from the people who saw you run past, or from the engagement elsewhere, that how they perceive the event and whether they saw it's
You probably had you probably had first-hand experience of this. Back in the first year that we ran it, Sierra Leone is not like Kenya. It's not like Ethiopia. There is no tradition of long distance running. It's not a country in which mass participation athletics events have ever made their mark. So a lot of people didn't know how long a marathon was. They just thought it was running a long way. There was no understanding of what exactly it represented to run a marathon. So I would say that Street Child can be credited with having introduced endurance events to Sierra Leone. I think at the time there was a marathon that was just getting underway in Liberia, just further south of Sierra Leone. But I think that in that chunk of Africa, the Street Child Marathon in Makeni was the first one. And of course, I thought it was insane. I remember arriving at the airport and being asked what I was doing in Sierra Leone, and I told the airport official that I was going to run a marathon, and the guy just looked at me as though I was off my head. And that was pretty much the reaction we got for everybody in the days leading up to the event. But now they embrace it. I know from various people that I've been in contact with over the past 3 years, they've really missed it. They've really missed having us over there because Makeni is, it's a big party for Makeni. Makeni celebrates the marathon. There was even talk about 3 or 4 years ago. Tom was considering moving the marathon to another town in Sierra Leone, a town called Bo. And when people got wind of this, they were outraged. They become very sort of proprietorial of their marathon. So, I think initially when Ben Hodgson was our first ever race director in 2012. The country hadn't been mapped since the 60s officially. Nobody knew what was involved in staging an event like that, and it was very difficult to secure any kind of assistance from people in country.
Yeah.
The second year it was a little bit easier. The third year it was easier still, and then gradually it built up a lot of goodwill and momentum. And now, it's not quite true to say that the race runs itself because an awful lot of hard work goes into putting it on, but it's a damn sight easier than it was 10 years ago.
And in terms of local runners, because I know the first year, I can't remember his name, but it was won by a good London runner. But then when I went, my year where I was hoping to win the whole thing, got the poos, which didn't help, but actually would have been thrashed anyway by, I think it was Idris, who was a local runner who was just naturally super talented. Like, have you seen it change the sport in Makeni?
Yes, I'm not sure if Street Child can take the credit for that, but there's a group of very good runners in Freetown who come down to Makeni every year for the race. I'm not sure if they existed 10 years ago. But definitely. Sierra Leone is football crazy, so football is always going to be the sport. If you want to get on with anybody in Sierra Leone, you give them a football, or even better, you bring them a pair of football boots. David Beckham once stayed in a hotel in Makeni somewhere, and there's a plaque with his name on it outside, and I don't think anybody will ever top David Beckham coming to stay in
what
that
was
hotel.
Beckham doing there? Because Sierra Leone's got some lovely beaches, but it's not where I'd imagine Beckham would go.
I don't know what he was doing there. I'll find out. I'll find out when I'm there. But anyway, people still talk about the day David Beckham stayed in that hotel. So I don't think anything will ever top football. But there is more running. There's definitely more running.
And I know the year we were there, there was a bit of a challenge in that Idris wasn't eating well and couldn't fuel properly, but also it was heavily suggested that the friends or the group of the second runner had suggested to Idris that he shouldn't win because the prize money was significant enough that they wanted it,
Yeah.
and so he sat in second, quite not happily, but he didn't run as well as he could. Like, are there still issues along those lines?
Yeah. I mean, it's the prize money is it's a life-changing amount of money. Um,
Mm,
so and people are very competitive. I mean, the circumstances that you've just described, that was year two, but I think something very similar happened in year one, uh,
mm.
year three. I mean, every year something like that happens. It's it's just part and parcel of staging a race in a place where it's taken very seriously. I mean, in a way, if you want to put an optimistic spin on it, you can say it's a measure of just how important the race has become.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that is true. And do you think that there's been because my if there wasn't a prize, do you think the local pride would still drive that
Yeah,
competition?
yeah, absolutely.
And the, the year we were there as well, the president started the race.
Yes,
Um,
and that was year two. Ernest Kuroma was the president at the time. And what's even more, I mean, that's evidence of just how much cachet the race had acquired
mm,
in just that small period of time, in the 12 months between year one and year two. Um, it was a street child intern called Emma Taylor who got that working, who secured that deal. And he didn't just start the race; he actually ran 5K of it, or maybe that was year three. But I don't know if you can
I
picture
don't
this
remember
guy.
him being a slight chap.
But yeah, exactly. That is what is so extraordinary. Given his girth and his morphology, he actually managed to run 5K surrounded by bodyguards. And that was probably the hardest 5K that anybody has ever run any time ever. So
Yeah, oh,
that's all
fair
good.
play. And do you get a sense of how has the culture and has almost the power structures within sports and within the local area adapted around needs and the demands almost of the charity, or do you get a sense of that?
I don't know. I mean, it's difficult for me to speak to that because, of course, we're only
Mm,
there for a very brief period of time, and we're there in a
mm,
very specific period of time. We're there at the cusp, just between the end of the rainy season, or the end of the rainy season and the beginning of the hot season. Um, so it's difficult to say, to be honest.
yeah. Now, the one thing that they're very good at with the fundraising is realizing that people really want to be raising for something specific. And so they always focused on building schools and training teachers. 10 years of building schools and training teachers adds up to quite a lot of schools. So what you for example have 4 schools, I believe, named after yourself or just bought by?
No, they are. I mean, Street Child is all about eradicating barriers to education for children, but specifically, I think there's definitely an emphasis on making it easier for girls to stay in school, because up until a decade ago, there was a very specific, almost a career path for girls. They might go to school initially, but really they would just beg in the streets, and then they graduated from begging to pickpocketing, and then from pickpocketing to prostitution, teenage pregnancy, and then if they survived that, then a life of hardship, providing for their children, eking out a living as best they can. So everybody knows that the secret to ending poverty is lifting women specifically out of poverty and female empowerment. So Street Child has had various projects over the years that have been specifically geared towards keeping girls in education for as long as possible. There was the Girls Speak Out project a few years ago. So my schools are named after 4 women who have played an important role in my life. My mother, my adopted mother, who's French, the woman who gave me my first ever job, a woman called Anne Judge, and my mother's best friend with whom she was at school in New York 60 years ago. So just, important women who have made ripples through my life, as it were.
And because I remember when we were there, we visited your school, and
yeah, I think back then it was just called the Ord-Hume School back then, but they've changed the name to the Judith Ord-Hume School, and rightly so.
And I saw the response that you received from the local community there. How have you? What kind of impact have you seen, like day to day, or just in the local communities from those 10 years of schooling, and how would you say it's changed the local community?
Well, I've got, I've got 4 schools, but in total, I think hundreds of schools have been built under Street Child's auspices over the past 10 years. I think there is a rule somewhere that to be considered a school, a building has to have a permanent roof on it. There was a time when a school was just a bunch of kids who would gather around a tree or something, and somebody would go through the motions of teaching them how to read for an hour or so. But during the Civil War, the last thing anybody thought about was learning how to read or sitting in a school or education. So there wasn't the need for the schools because people were just thinking about staying alive. So the schools disappeared, and nobody was going to think about building a school because they thought, well, what kids are going to go to school in the first place? So it was a sort of a very nefarious circle. It was a weird, a very negative relationship. So you build a school, you've got to start putting people in the school. You can't just build a school and expect people to attend it. You have to, there has to be a shift in culture, and there has to be a lot of efforts have to go into raising awareness of the importance of education. So, Street Child hasn't just been building schools; it's also been, there's a guy called JMK, who I frequently post on Facebook about, John Mamadou Karbo, I think his name is. His job is literally to drive out to the most remote areas of Sierra Leone, find kids who are not in school, and tell them what school is, tell them how it can transform their lives, tell them how it can empower them. And he manages a team of community animators and volunteers, and their combined efforts ensure that every year hundreds of schools can be built or repaired, education resources can be delivered, and teachers trained. So yeah, I mean, and he's a Street Child employee. He's paid by Street Child. 10 years ago, that didn't exist. A school was a rare thing to see. You might be driving through through McKinney or Freetown or Bow or a sizable city, and you would see one or two. Now you literally see them everywhere. You can be in the most remote village, in a place that's very, very difficult to get to by road, and you will see a school. So that is definitely something that has changed.
And because I'm aware that people are going to school very young, so actually they're still teenagers now, even the ones who started off in school.
Yeah.
But have you seen? Is there a tangible difference, do you think, in the trajectory of those girls, for example? Have we seen a drop in females going into pickpocketing or kind of female sex workers?
I think Tom has tried very hard to quantify this. I think a lot of work has gone into producing reports that back all this up. I would say so. I mean, I can only speak, anecdotally. But in addition to the work that Street Child does, putting kids in schools, there's also the small business scheme that Street Child organises. So, I think it would be very difficult for the people who are beneficiaries of Street Child grants to set up their businesses if they had not had a few years of schooling. So I think we'll probably see the real fruits of these endeavours will probably be more tangible in another 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I'm an optimist. I mean, there's so much to do in Sierra Leone. Back in 2012, it was officially the world's poorest country in terms of GDP.
It was the youngest as well, wasn't it? The youngest average age, because so
Yeah,
many adults have been killed.
yeah, very low life expectancy and a very young population.
Yeah.
So, and also, it's one of these crazy ironies, crazy paradox. A country can be the poorest, but it can also have at the same time the fastest growing economy. And I think for a long time, for about 3 or 4 years, Sierra Leone was both the poorest country in terms of GDP, and it had the fastest growing economy. So that means that there's a lot going on. There's a lot of a lot of people have ideas. A lot of people want to do something with their drive and their energy and their innovation. I can't remember what I was going to say. I can't remember what my original point was.
And one thing that I thought would be really useful, because we've often talked about fundraising. Jody and I, two people who've been. I mean, we know CJ Chan is gone, Nick Butt has gone. We must have had other guests who've also been out there. I think Riley went out. But you've raised every year, and you fundraise pretty much throughout the year as well. Like, from your experience, like, how have you kept your fundraising fresh, and what have you found that worked? Because it seems to be, unless people are naturally gifted marketeers or have rich friends and family, it seems to be harder and harder to actually.
Well, I can tell you what my experience has been. I think for the past few years, I've averaged about 5,000 a year, 5,000 an event. You've done the London Marathon 100 times. For a lot of people, that is the race they want to do. And if they're not a superlative athlete as you are, they don't get in on the ballot, they'll look around for a charity that they can raise money for. But it's not a charity that they care about. How can it be? You can't care abstractly about absolutely everything. There's so much to care about. You can't care for everything. So they'll look around for a charity that will say, okay, we are building underpasses for hedgehogs. If you raise £1,000 for us, then you can do the London Marathon. So these people will post in a very sort of mechanical way about how desperate these poor hedgehogs are for underpasses. And of course, it's a laudable cause. Most causes are worthy causes, but not everybody can care passionately about every single cause. I think I am lucky because, this is a line that I use a lot, and I use it a lot because it works. But there's a very tangible relationship between people donating money and schools being built. I have lent up against schools that were built by money that my friends have donated. And it's very easy for me to speak sincerely about it. It's very easy for me to speak legitimately and convincingly and passionately about it because it's true. And I always say that if people have any doubt, back in the 80s when we had Live Aid, thousands, if not millions of pounds just disappeared. It just got trapped in the slow working cogs of the complex machines that govern how money is conveyed from donors to the beneficiaries. And it took years for some of that money to find its way to them. But nowadays you're clicking on a Just Giving website, and within days that money is fetching itself up on the shores of whatever beneficiaries it's intended for. So I always tell people that I can look them in the eye and tell them that I know for absolutely for certain that money is going to the right place and it's doing wonderful things and it's having a transformational effect on the lives of people in some of the world's poorest communities. And I think being able to say that sincerely makes me a more convincing salesperson.
And have you honed your technique at all? Do you find that some approaches have worked better than others? Are there some friends you've badgered out of friendship? Does it always work out in the way you intended, or
have I honed my technique? No, I don't think so. I mean, you've been on the receiving end of my technique over the years. I use social media a lot. I send out emails, and I keep asking people. I mean, anybody who has fundraised knows that it's a difficult thing to do
Yeah,
because we don't. Nobody really likes being asked for money, but I think fundamentally people want to do good.
mm,
Every year I think to myself, it's going to be difficult this year. People are going to, compassion fatigue. 10
mm.
years ago, the global financial crisis. Now, 2 years of pandemic. Our economy is in the toilet. And I thought to myself, this is going to be a tough sell this year. But I set up a fundraising page on Saturday, and 3.5 grand has come in already. And
Wow.
I think people are kind souls. People want to give. Um, and
I think
you
there's an element as well of the fact that you do ask again and again,
I do ask. That's true. That's
and
true.
actually,
And
um,
I mean, I just say to myself, what's the worst thing that can happen? They'll, they'll say no. They won't give. I mean, I am quite shameless. I admit
yeah,
that.
and actually, I think it does work in that not everyone gives every time, and not everyone's in a good mood when they receive your email. Not
Yeah.
everyone's just had their payday when they've received the email. But if you do it every year, one of those days they're going to be in a good mood, and it's going to be payday, and they're
Oh,
going to be like, "I haven't given to Josh for 3 years."
yeah. And there's something else. I'm not fabulously wealthy, um, but I went to a talk about 15 years ago, and it's funny. I've just remembered this. It took me a long time to kind of implement um, whatever takeaways I got from this talk.
Mm,
But it was, I mean, basically, the guy giving the talk talked about his 30% rule. He just decided he was going to give away 30% of his income every year for as long as he could, just as an experiment.
yeah.
Um, Anytime anybody asks me for money, even if I don't know them, or even if I only know them tangentially, I give. Not a huge amount, but I spread as much around as I
Mm,
possibly can, because karma does enter into this somewhere. If you give, then you can, you stand a better chance of somebody giving to your charity when you
mm,
ask. So, I think people like you, people like me, were very lucky because we inhabit this intersection of a weird Venn diagram. On the one hand, you have ambitious sporting endeavor, running in the jungle, um, doing difficult things. And on the other circle of this Venn diagram, you have making the world a better place. So that intersection of people doing crazy things to raise money, I think is a wonderful place to be. You encounter the best of humanity in that intersection. And I actually said to a friend of mine on Sunday morning, just after I'd set up this fundraising page, and straight away money started just dropping in out of the sky. I said, really, all I want to do is run and fundraise, because you see the best of humanity if you're doing those two things.
mm, mm. And do you still find you get as much out of the trips as you did in the early days? Does each pound, is it as exciting as the first? Is
Yeah,
the
I'd say so, without any shadow of a doubt. Um, and I sweep the marathon. I think that I only ever tried to run it properly once or twice. So the last, for as long as I can remember, I have been with the people at the back of the race for whom it really is a challenge.
mm,
David, anybody can run a 2:30 marathon. You just have to give up chocolate, carbs,
yeah,
Sunday morning lions, happiness, your friends,
friends.
chocolate, alcohol. You just have to give up all of those things and train. Anybody can do that.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
but it's a lot harder for people who are going to do a 7.5 hour marathon or an 8 hour marathon, because the suffering lasts a lot longer. So some of my best experiences have been, if I can name check somebody called Sharon Irvine, who was with us about 3 or 4 years ago. She and Pauline Kafaki who nearly died of Ebola came back to Sierra Leone with us as part of a Panorama documentary.
Mm.
And Sharon and I and Mark Moore, we swept the race together. So we literally spent 7.5, 8 hours talking about the Ebola response, meeting a lot of Red Cross soldiers who had been part of it. And it was an incredibly sobering experience. We learned so much about each other, but you have the best talks with people when you're trying to get them through something difficult. So yeah, it's every year is special.
And would you say the people who come have changed the demographic?
That's a good question. I think it's fair to say that it tends to be the same. Quite. I'm always. Well, obviously, the more years go by, the more this holds true. But I'm definitely the oldest. By a country mile now. I think they tend to be people in their late 20s, early 30s, with not much in the way of responsibilities, and who want to engage with the world. I mean, they tend to be good people. They tend to be people who who can see the mess that their parents have left for them to clean up, and they have bright ideas about doing good and about how things can be improved. They tend to be interesting people.
And what would you say have you been your highlights then over those 10 years?
I think definitely the Ebola year was extremely memorable. I mean, I don't know if I would call it a highlight, but when that year we postponed the race from May until November, so that would have been November 2015, and Sierra Leone had not yet been declared Ebola free. So it was very strange when our pandemic started up 2 years ago, because I had a tremendous sense of déjà vu, because what we experienced in Sierra Leone 7 years ago was weirdly similar to what we have been experiencing here in Europe for the past 2 years. It was eerie to be in a country where I think that year, actually on the course there were Ebola checkpoints. We would be running along through the jungle, and suddenly we'd have to stop and wash our hands and hand sanitize. All of the things we've been doing 2 years here. But it was very strange to see a country that had been hit so hard yet again, sort of getting back up onto its knees. And Ebola was terrible. I mean, it orphaned 11,500 people. Thousands of people died. It was pretty horrific. So that was certainly memorable. Not for great reasons, but it was certainly heartwarming to see how enthusiastically they welcomed us back after after an 18-month hiatus. I think that the image of the race that will stay in my mind forever was year one, the very first year, when Tom's father came out with us. Tom's father is the former head of the British Army. So Tom brought him out as a kind of a good luck charm, a mascot, a protector, and of course he's got a high profile in Sierra Leone because he liberated the country. And in those days, the only city, the only town in Sierra Leone that had an electricity supply was Freetown. So Makeni was just these ad hoc generators all the time that would break down incessantly. There was no street lighting. When it was dark, it was dark. And I just remember this, Tom's father setting us off, and we all assembled at 5 a.m. in the pitch black African night, really sort of close, humid. It was like breathing I mean, you've experienced it yourself. It was so unbelievably hot. It was like breathing,
breathing
lamp
sweat
oil.
almost.
Yes, yeah. And we were thinking, on earth are we going to run? How are we going to run in this weather? It's not even, the sun's not even up yet. And I could just hear this booming military voice telling us all how we had to look after ourselves. At the end of the day, the person who has ultimate responsibility for our well-being is us. Our lives. We are holding our own lives in our own hands. And I thought to myself, this is probably what the speech that he's giving us now. It's probably the same speech that he used to give to people before sending them off to die in battle. It might as well be the same speech. But in that pitch black African night, everybody, you could tell that everybody was utterly excited. That everybody's hair was standing on end. And I will always remember that booming military voice telling us that we could potentially die out there, but he was very much looking forward to counting us back in at the end of the race. So it was just that palpable sense of excitement in the air, knowing that we were doing something. We were trailblazing. We were doing something that nobody else had ever done before, and it was thrilling.
And do you think that the start line still has that energy from the people?
Yeah, it's unlike anything else. It's unlike the London Marathon. It's unlike Berlin. It's unlike any city marathon. I would say so. Yeah.
And what would you say are the challenges now, 10 years on? There's far more races out there. We've mentioned the Impact Marathon. We've mentioned there's also the Uganda Marathon that's based on almost a fairly similar model. It's more crowded, but also friends of friends of friends have, a lot of them have been. It's harder to find that new person who hasn't heard of it. Do you think it's an upward battle to try and?
I think so. Yes. I mean, you mentioned Nick and Impact. I don't think Nick would be angry at me if I suggested that his own template draws inspiration very heavily from Street Child. And it's definitely, there are more and more people out there who want to run somewhere interesting, who want to have an adventure, do good, and get a marathon out of it. So, yeah, I mean, it's a rich scheme of fundraising. I think a lot of NGOs know that a very good way to raise money is to put on an event like this as inexpensively as possible and get a whole lot of people out there to do it and get them to engage with projects in the process. So it can only get harder. And that's why I think Street Child is going to have to do a lot of work upstream and just getting people involved in the charity. Having other events. There's the craft half. Did you ever do the craft half?
Yeah,
you did. Yes. Yeah. We had a beer drinking marathon on Wimbledon Common a few years ago. I think we did 2 or 3 of them all together.
Yeah, they were fantastic.
Yeah. So just I mean, but that's always going to be a challenge. In building engagement upstream. That's what it's about. It's marketing really. So there was a time when Street Child was just Jan and Britt Green and a telephone at Liverpool Street Station. Now there is more of a marketing machine.
And you get a sense of that, almost not weariness, but when you speak to people who've not heard about the race, is it less exciting to them now than 10 years ago when they'd be like, wow,
I don't know. I think everybody has to work a little bit harder to get people out there. That's just an inevitability. I think if something works, if it's thrilling, then people are going to try and copy it. But there is you're interviewing me, but I'm not the only person who feels loyal to Street Child. There's Phil Langley in Gibraltar. In Malaga rather, who only missed one. There's Nella, Petronella West, who's coming out this year, who again has only missed one.
Yeah.
She's CEO of Investment Quorum and raises thousands every year very successfully. And she, again, she's someone else who has completely sort of bought into the legitimacy of what Street Child is doing every so often. And she'll bring people out with her every year. At least one person gets it,
Yeah.
and loyalty is built, and that loyalty sort of cascades through to another bunch of people.
And has COVID almost built a break in the connection of previous years to this? Because I know previously the main tool seemed to be, you've done it, now tell your friends, now bring your friends, now go to your running club, now spread the word, and that worked successfully. My friend Leroy and various K-Walks, friend Matt, they all came because I'd heard about it, and then other people from the Hash House Harriers came because they'd heard about it, and it does filter on. Like, is there the fear, or has it already been shown that COVID has created almost dug a moat between?
I think COVID has done that to a lot of things generally on the planet. Just before we started recording, we were talking about how Mark Morn is in Sierra Leone now, putting things in place. 3 months ahead of race day, he's trying to sort of sort out road closures, water stations, accommodation, all the kinds of things. We have to make sure that hotels are available for that week. So about the 20 odd guest houses have to be sort of blocked out. We have to make sure that there's enough food to feed 100 Europeans who are going to come out. All of this it seems very minor, but it has to be done, and it's very important. If one of those things goes wrong, the whole thing falls over. So after and it has been 3 years. It's been, the last one we did was May 2019. We went into lockdown in March 2020. So that was, it's been more than two. It's been a full 3-year cycle. And it makes it that little bit harder to sort of get the machine back up and running, because if we're just going from 1 year to the next, then people remember the event, and they remember that they really enjoyed helping out, and they remember the goodwill that the event generated. 3 years on,
pictures of their friends on social media as well.
Yeah. And so 3 years on, people might no longer be in particular jobs, so it's harder to find the person in question who's responsible for, a road closure or whatever. So I think Mark is probably going to have to work that little bit harder this year, but he'll do it. I have complete confidence in him.
And if you were to give a kind of a final sales pitch to anyone listening, because by the time this comes out, we'll hopefully put it out mid-March. So 2 months out, and still time enough to train, time enough to sign up. What are the main things you focus on that people would get back from it?
Well, people often say, why should I do something like this? That's not the question you should ask yourself, because that's a difficult question to answer. The question you should ask yourself is, why shouldn't I be doing this? No, as you well know, nobody has ever regretted going out for a run. Nobody has ever regretted doing a marathon, and hardly anybody regrets going to a far off land and doing something interesting. So if you put all those 3 things together, it's just impossible to resist.
I'm going to say of all the things you said, I think you could have done better on the sales there, but I like it. If people want to sign up, I guess they just go to. If
they go to the Street Child website, presumably you'll put a link on this somewhere. In big letters somewhere on that front page should be a link to the Sierra Leone Marathon. Obviously, the sooner people sign up, the better. That gives you more time to prepare, to train, to fundraise. And I think we're going to be having more meetups throughout March and April. So there's plenty. There's always someone who can, if someone wants to sign up, there's always going to be someone to look after them. That person might be me, it might be Catherine, it might be Anna or somebody else, but there will always be someone to sort of marshal them, to shepherd them through the whole process.
And if you don't want to run it yet, at the meetups they do have free drinks. So just go for the free drinks. You don't have to think you're going to run it, but then you'll drink quite a few of the free drinks. Before you know it, you'd suddenly wake up and be like, oh crap, what have I done?
I think there's a long established history of people having registered to do crazy events on the back of a hangover, or before a hangover kicks in, I should say.
Yeah, absolutely. And without the Street Child, there wouldn't be a beer-a-thon, there wouldn't be a Bad Boy Running podcast.
Exactly. I often have friendly debates with people who think that international development actually stops governments from pulling their fingers out and sorting out things themselves. But the thing is, you can't. My argument is that you're sacrificing the here and you're sacrificing immediacy on the altar of ideology or politics. If you get a kid into education, if you build a school, you never know who you're going to help. There might be some kid who ends up going to a school that you have helped fund, and that kid grows up and finds a cure to cancer or solves the energy crisis, works out how to get energy out of water, or does something that has an amazing ripple effect across the entire, all of humanity. So just as how you never know who you are going to help, you never know what's going to happen to you when you do a trip like this. I know lots of people who have met, other people on these trips, and those people who shaped their lives. I can trace back a lot of the, to this day, I'm in contact, and I socialized with a lot of people who I met on that very first trip. So I would say, I could even say it had a transformative effect on my own life, and I think it's sort of awoke in me a pathological need to engage with the world a lot more than I had before it.
Well, I mean I'd say that's the better sales pitch of the two.
Better than the free drinks. No, I've met some really interesting people. Quite seriously, it's important to keep company with interesting people. It's important to keep company with people who are going to stretch you and challenge you in all sorts of ways. And I can honestly say that I've met nothing but interesting people on in Sierra Leone.
And for the listener, for the divan who likes a challenge as well, racing hard at this race is bloody hard. You don't have to do that. You can just turn up and have a lovely time and enjoy it. But yeah,
and I would say, David, you are an amazing athlete, but not everybody is an amazing athlete. And a lot of people, I always think that I think people who are at the back, they enjoy it a lot more. People who just treat it, you don't treat it as an athletics, don't treat it as a sports event. Just treat it as look at it as an anthropological experiment. Just enjoy it from an anthropological perspective rather than an athletics perspective.
Yeah, and if you're looking for a partner, my then girlfriend is now married to my other friend who was there. And they didn't meet at the event, but I'm sure there's a kernel of love in there somewhere.
Matt and Kate.
Matt and Kate, yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
I do remember.
So happy endings all around. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Josh. And if people want to donate specifically to your page, is there an easy way for them to find it? Or we can post it in the group, but
I think it would really help me out if you could share the link. I think that's maybe a bit me taking the piss.
That's fine. Yeah.
But obviously anybody who donates to my page, I will donate to whatever fundraising, whatever charity initiative they're backing at some point in the future.
Thanks for 10 years of positivity, support, and giving to the world, and long may there be another 10.
And I hope you'll come back for the 10th. Next year is the 10th, so I hope you come back for that one.
Well, it's I'm not ruling it out. I'm not saying definitely, but I think a few drinks are the next and the next catch up, meet up, and we'll see what happens. Cheers, Josh.
Okay, take care. Thanks, Dave.
So do better. That, hopefully you've enjoyed that. We weren't really sure how it was going to go, and I'll be honest with you, put it together as a little bit of a sale on going to Sierra Leone, because, as we hinted at the end, the disconnection from 3 years ago, the race and those runners, they have more places than they thought they would by this stage. It's such an important charity, and it truly is an amazing race. And the crazy thing about the organisation, they've hinted about Mark going out there, is because the turnover of staff is so high, because they rely on fairly junior people, because that's how the salary structure is. And so the race always feels like the first year, because they never have the full handover, and so there's always some craziness going on. And it has the energy, from what people have said, every year, of the unknown, and of something a little bit different. So if you are free, in fact, I'll check the dates now before you can actually check while you're running, while you're looking at your phone. So it's the 1st of June 2022. If you are free on the 1st of June, which is my wedding weekend, that is the beginning of the trip. And Jody and I both had the most incredible time. And while Josh said, you don't know who you're going to help, that's true for the future. But actually, what's incredible about this trip is you get to go to the places where the skills are built. You get to hang out with the children. You get to see the areas in which they do the micro loans. And so you truly do see, unlike a lot of charities, who you're going to help. And then you run through those areas and you see the support they give back to the runners. Children run along, they're going crazy. People come out and clap because they felt the help of the money you're going to be raising. So if this is a slight consideration, speak to me, speak to Jody, speak to Josh, and we'll tell you more about it, because as Josh said, it's more like, why wouldn't you do this? It coincides everything that's good in the world. So give it some consideration. I hope you like this episode. If there's any subjects or guests you'd like to interview in future episodes, then message me, david@badboyrun.com, or message us on Instagram. We didn't get the post out for questions this time, but typically, if you follow us on Instagram, you can then ask questions that we ask to the guests directly. And if you'd love to review us or to subscribe, that really helps us, particularly the reviews, and particularly from a country that no one else has reviewed in, because you then become the voice for the entire country of that country's view of Bad Boy Running. So do consider doing that. Thanks for listening, guys, and we'll see you next time.